good evening, and welcome to the first online live session of Duke Reads for this academic year. It's good to see you all again. Tonight, Melissa Malouf joins us to talk about In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. I would show you this copy, which is the one I read, but you know, Melissa, you better do it, because here's the great thing. That's the version I read in high school, and
it cost $2.45.
It excited me to see that again, because it's the one book I actually finished in high school, and I liked it, so I'm glad we got to do it again. But let me tell you more about Melissa, who is Associate Professor of the Practice of English at Duke. She earned her PhD in English and American Literature from the University of California at Irvine. She is the Director of the Office of Undergraduate Scholars and Fellows, Duke's umbrella organization for Duke's premier merit scholarship programs. In 1997, she was selected by Duke students as the winner of the Distinguished Undergraduate Alumni Teaching Award. Professor Malouf has been a Breadloaf Fellow and a Pushcart Prize winner, and is the author of a collection of short stories, No Guarantees, and a novel, It Had to Be You. Also 3 one-act plays, 2 opera libretti, and numerous book reviews. She's been the director of the Arts and Contemporary Society Focus Program since 1998. So we need to start our discussion with Melissa Malouf. And you know the first question, why did you choose this collection of short stories?
Why did I choose this? When Rachel Davies asked me to participate in Duke Reads, and I thought about sort of my coming into a different kind of reading experience when I was in college, and that had a lot to do with this book and with the teacher that I had at the time, who will go unnamed for various reasons. And I think one of the things I've already mentioned is that my students to whom I've taught this book know this, that it has one of the great sentences in American literature. And I suppose that was my first instinct in choosing this book. This is about reading, okay, let's read the sentence, and if that would be our only topic. But then as I thought more about it, it seemed to me to be relevant to what we're thinking about these days, and people going to Iraq and coming back from Iraq, and how we take care of our soldiers. And I recently, in the last couple of months, saw a film called Day Zero, which imagines the draft being reinstated, say next year.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 guys, they're all in their 20s. One is married, professional, just bought a house, wife is pregnant. One is a working class guy, another is their friend, and they're very close, and they all get drafted. And it's a real struggle about whether, one of them wants to go to Canada, one of them wants to stay here, one of them ends up killing himself. So it was, just sort of in that context and thinking about what Hemingway tells us about manhood and being a man, and sort of thinking about our time as well as his time.
So I'm not going to go on until we find out what you believe is
the greatest
sentence in American literature, or literature in general.
No. I won't say greatest.
Okay.
But just a particularly great sentence, especially given the story, and it's at the end of Indian Camp. And maybe that would be, the end of the story would be a good place to start, just to say a couple of things else about this story. The sentence is, in the early morning on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat, with his father rowing, he, young Nick Adams, he's about 8 here, he felt quite sure that he would never die. You want me to tell you why that sentence is great?
Yeah.
You sure? You could say no.
No.
Okay, the main clause, he felt quite sure that he would never die. Okay, and and we'll go back to why this is even an issue for him. But all of those prepositional phrases that precede this feeling of being quite sure are conditional.
That is some mighty close reading.
It's fun, isn't it?
It is, because the sentence struck. Now, I want
And
you
look
to
at how
continue
look
that
how it
thought.
goes. They're
Wow.
going across the lake. So you can imagine. Okay, in the
That's
early
great.
morning, stroke, on the lake, stroke, sitting in the stern of the boat, stroke, with his father rowing, another stroke of the year. Now they're at the other side. All those conditions are gone. He's
Wow,
in
all those things
trouble.
are changed, yeah.
So
And
the quite sure is gone by the time they get to the other side of the lake. It's not morning, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
And what should have clued any of us in is just the sheer length of that sentence and how uncharacteristic it is for the number of commas and conditional clauses, conditional or otherwise, that made that up. So we should have known something was up with that sentence right away, just by looking at it.
Well,
Yeah, good.
but
That's great.
No, I can't. I learned this. This didn't. The first time I
Yeah.
read this, I didn't say, "Oh yeah, okay." This is the kind of thing that I learned, but that really excited me. And as a writer, this is also the kind of thing that, kind of goes into my writer's bank. There's a sort of library and there's other stuff, but there's a writer's bank. And I remember, if I need something,
Yeah.
if I need this, if I need to set something up like this, I know what to do.
But that's an important thing to know, and certainly we're going to invite your questions, because we will be talking about the many, many themes that are contained in these stories, and that's what we want to talk about. But I think the whole question of how to read and tips for deriving as much out of this as we can. We do have a comment, and I think maybe this is the time for this, because what you've suggested here is a way to get more out of reading. Here's a man known for his short sentences, noun, verb, and when that thing jumped out at you with so many clauses, it was a good time to stop and say, I wonder why he did that. So, and here's a question. I intend to listen to the discussion tonight, maybe to learn from Professor Malouf what I missed by reading in our time. The best thing about the book, it's short. It can be read quickly. I couldn't develop empathy with Nick or the other characters. So, well, let's do that through
Let me think about that. I mean,
Okay.
empathy. I do feel empathy for Nick, partly because I see this Indian camp story is his initiation into manhood. Okay, all this is and I think with this kind of initiation, he has very little to think of in terms of possibility. What are the other possibilities for him and so forth. But I don't think. I'm hesitating because I don't think he's a very wonderful character, but I think that that's because of the limitations of his world, okay, and that is a world of men,
Right.
for the most part. In this, one of the things about this story, and reading this story is it probably could have easily and should have logically started inside the cabin where the woman is trying to have her baby.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to have all this other stuff in the beginning. The boat ride over. What's that about? Why are there two canoes and they're competing as to who's going to get there first?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the little first piece of initiation. But the other thing, it seems to me, that's really important about this beginning is what we learn about the Indian men and the camp. The men had moved off up the road to sit in the dark and smoke out of the range of the noise she made. They know how to take care of themselves.
By themselves.
By themselves, but they can't stand the screaming. So they're going to go down the road away from the screaming. Her husband, unfortunately, is stuck in the same room.
Which leads us to our first question, and that is in Indian camp, why do, as Nick's father says, women never or hardly ever kill themselves?
Well, my guess, okay, I don't want to sound too definitive about this, but my guess on the basis of this story, or at least in the language of this story, I think he's saying that when women are in pain, are afraid, are fragile, are fearful, and so forth, they get to scream. And her husband, who's up on the upper bunk, can't do that. That's not, if he's not being a man, if he says, "Get me out of here, I can't stand this." So Nick's dad says, "Yeah, he can't stand things." We probably know he's not dying of his injury to his foot.
Right.
He doesn't get to be one of those guys that's
Right.
out there in the dark smoking away from the screaming.
It's a strategy, yeah. I mean, being away is a strategy, but it's not a very expressive one, and it's certainly, it's one that disassociates yourself from the problem.
Right. And so my sense is that what Nick gets out of this is that, remember what Nick gets out of this are the choices that he has. You have pretending that the screams don't matter, which his dad can do because he's a professional. You have going out in the dark away from all of this life,
Right.
okay? The screaming, the baby, all of that, the blood. Or you can kill yourself.
And
It's a pretty grim, pretty grim introduction into what his choices are going to be.
what it takes to be a man. He's
Yes.
learning how to be a man, and these are the choices. This is,
I think, in terms
Yeah.
of in this story.
well, and then in the next one, if you want to move on, I mean, we can talk about the doctor and the doctor's wife. I think he's a little older, but he's, again, faced with this choice of a kind of sullen silence and, disassociation or conversation.
Yeah, although what interests me about this story, it comes after Indian camp, and the doctor has been, as he says himself, like a sports hero, which is also brings out that wry comment from Uncle George, "You think you're some big man, don't you?" But anyway, the doctor's had a real fun pulling off the cesarean section with his fishing gear. And now we see him put down. Not in every case is he the guy who can control his emotions, for one thing, although he does a pretty good job here.
Right.
But what he tries to do in this case, this is like, the screams don't matter because I don't hear them. This is driftwood.
Mm-hmm.
It's not stolen.
Right.
Okay? You just kind of, you tell yourself, as one of the phrases that's been in the news in the last year, if we name things long enough, we can make new realities, right? We just rename them. It's not this, it's that. We're winning. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into the politics of this stuff. But anyway, if you name, we're not losing, we're winning. This isn't stolen.
Right.
I didn't steal these logs. He did steal the logs. Yeah. And so that, sort of gives us another kind of look at one of the things that Doc is trying to do, okay, with Dick Bolton, insofar as asserting himself, and Dick asserts himself back, and we have this other.
Right.
Dick is not afraid of the power, and we almost have violence come out here.
Right. And we're certainly not sure why he's getting his shotgun ready when he goes back home. So that makes it even more tense. Well, it did for me.
Yeah. Don't you think it's really weird that this doctor married a Christian scientist?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what to make of that. But anyway, I think it also, though, has something to do with the way that she represents a woman who says, now,
Yeah.
take it easy.
Right.
Things will work out. You shouldn't talk that way. Don't get mad. This is the kind of woman you must get away from.
Mm-hmm. Well, the getting away part, but I mean, he is loading a shotgun after this event, and we're not quite sure that he's going to go out and hunt squirrel at that moment. We're thinking I thought, he's preparing for the worst here, or he's sort of burning with rage, and he's going to settle this thing because Dick has really gotten to him. No?
Yes,
I was nervous
except
about it.
Yeah.
There were clues?
But Frank, I'm sure that you're right. I don't think he wants to shoot.
Oh, no, no,
Dick
no, he
Bolton.
doesn't. No, it's clear at the end that they're going hunting. I'm saying there was
Yes.
a tension before we knew that. You know,
Okay.
precisely what he was doing with that shotgun at that moment when the shotgun makes its appearance in the story, I wasn't sure. Now, I'm pretty
Okay.
sure at the end he's going to go on
I
hunt.
think that the
Yeah.
shotgun, first of all, I think this is what I would call comfort food. Get my gun out and stroke it.
Yeah.
It's also phallic.
Well, it
I
is.
seem to be distressing you.
No, it's of course
But I
it
think
is.
it
And this-
comforts him to take out his gun and wipe it
Sure.
down, clean it, reload it. You know, I'm still a powerful guy. I got
Right,
my gun. I'm going to be okay. He's soothing himself.
Well, and it's significant that he is doing that himself. That his wife appears not to be anybody he'd ever consider as comfort in that way.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
she-
not in that way.
Not in that way. No, I mean, so what is the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of that. I mean, I think that's not only the violence, but he lies to her too. I mean, not only is he lying to Dick about the origin of this stuff. No, I didn't provoke him to anything.
Yeah.
Is there?
But one
did
of
you-
my, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wondered if you made anything of the fact that there's a couple power relationships between Dick and Nick's father. One is the size differential, where it's pretty clear Dick's a big guy, so you're taking on a bit of trouble, and he likes to fight. It makes him happy. So we know there's that trouble, but then there's also the political power relationship. He's a Native American. They lost the war to the Europeans. And here's a way of getting back. I mean, I had that sense that you stole it. I mean, by the way, you stole this land. I mean, there's this sort of
Well, I'm not sure that
subtext of-
Hemingway is going that far
No?
with that. It might be, but I think this is, you know, he did with his family vacation in the Lake Country in Michigan. And this, in some ways, this is still Dick Bolton's territory. He may not own it, but this is his woods.
Okay.
These are vacationers. Doc and his friends. And I love that, by the way, that you reminded me that he was happy. These are typical Hemingway sentences. Dick Bolton looked at the doctor, period. Dick was a big man, period. He knew how big a man he was, period. He liked to get into fights, period. He was happy. Now,
He's
what is
happy.
that? Go back to what we
Yeah.
were thinking about Indian camp. You know, Dick likes to get into fights. He likes to explode. He likes to express himself. He's happy. You know, if you're holed up
Right.
or trying to somehow or another rechannel your anger, your fear, or something, you're not very happy. And this Doc is not happy.
No. He's a pretty sullen guy. We have a question from Lee, and it has to do with the disease that I am not familiar with. Has anyone analyzed the effect of Hemingway's hereditary hemochromatosis? Looks like hemochromatosis on his writing stories about death. I don't know what that disease is, though. So do you know anything about it?
No.
Hemochromatosis. Don't know.
I'm not sure. My guess is that that's whatever it is, is something that he developed late or later. These stories he wrote when he was a young man.
Young Man, published in 1925. This is really his first set of successful, I don't know if they're first published, but certainly successful stories. 1925, isn't it interesting that his very first story would deal with suicide and his questioning, sort of who does it and why? And is it a strategy? Is it for me, Dad? You know, you can see him looking into his father's eyes for this answer. Why don't women come in? He wants this answer.
Yeah. His father was still alive when he wrote these stories. You know, his father also shot himself.
Right.
2 siblings killed themselves. 2 siblings of Hemingway's. But they did, I think, the word is that they did because they were ill and didn't want to continue living. But, but anyway, I'm sorry I can't answer that question.
Do you know, if we can, Lee, if you can give us more about that condition, we'll
I know that
we'll
it's
know even
certainly
less.
in his later years he was hospitalized, and but I'm not think in those later years, the writing had pretty much pooped out.
Well, and I want to get to the next question, but it seems like we're here now talking about the biographical details of his life versus the characters he's created. And, you know, to what extent do we care? I mean, he's created these characters who are working things out, and they're big themes, important themes. Particularly what it means to be masculine in the modern age, to me, is crucial, and that's in this.
Yeah.
Do we care? I mean, there's all kinds of questions about, was he gay, a repressed gay man? And, you know, I did a lot of research on that, just looking into this along with some of the other theories, and I came to the conclusion that I don't care, that whatever he was dealing with, his characters have exquisitely sort of shown us a very serious riddle and a very serious problem that we're all coming to terms with. And in this case, masculinity, what it means to be a man.
Right.
And his sexual preferences seem to me not as important, or his conditions and what might have affected his.
No, I mean, I suppose it's interesting that we could say that as a son, husband, lover, he was awful. Why? You know, I mean, and some people would say misogynistic, but they also say homophobic. But man, maybe those things kind of go together in
Well,
some
they can,
way,
and they can
some
also be
way.
symptoms of repressed. I mean, you know, you can go into this as deeply as you want.
But that doesn't. I mean, I agree with you that doesn't really change or affect how we read the work.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't. In fact, we don't even have to. If we just had Indian Camp and Hemingway didn't kill himself, it would still be a great story. No, we don't need that. We don't need the context. We don't need the life. We need that, you know, imagining of that conversation.
Right. And how his characters are working it out. Ali is saying that it's a problem with iron. The disease is a problem with iron metabolism. His father and siblings and granddaughter did commit suicide. We know that. And depression is one aspect, as well as alcoholism. So depression may be a byproduct of this problem with metabolizing iron, which I can imagine it may have to do with mental function. It doesn't work as well if you're not metabolizing iron, either too much or too little in the bloodstream.
But I think in these stories and in the big novels that follow, he's still. I mean, he's. I mean, this is the work of a craftsman. I mean, I can't think. You know, we may say the content is kind of depressing, but he's not depressed when he's writing this stuff, in my view.
No, as you say, he's a young man. He's very early in his career.
Yeah. Well, you could still be depressed when you're 21. That's when Eliot wrote Proofread. Yeah.
And we don't know was he drinking all this time, or did that
Hemingway?
happen later? Yeah.
I think that it's also one of the things you learn when you're a soldier. Or, well, he wasn't exactly a soldier. He wasn't able to.
I mean, he was an ambulance driver.
Right,
Yeah.
because he didn't pass one of the physical tests.
Do you want to pursue this theme of, we've got some more questions, but I thought before we went on to the third question, we could again talk about this question of masculinity in other ways. Krebs in the soldier's home has, if not the best, one of the best sentences, one of the more provocative two sentences for me were, I've learned to deal without women. The Army teaches you to do that. And boy, they just grabbed me by the nape of the neck and shook me around, those two sentences. How perverse a society is that trains you that masculinity is to be without women.
Well, especially with women that you have to talk to. Okay, I mean, when he was as a soldier, he could have a prostitute, and it was but he says now at home he would have liked a girl if she had come to him and not wanted to talk. But here at home, it was all too complicated. You have to have courtship, you have to have conversations, you have to deal with their stupid feelings. You have to listen. Remember Marjorie in The End of Something, when they're rowing out to go fishing. Oh, our old ruin. They pass this building. It looks like a castle. No, it doesn't. No. I mean, she's got, and I shouldn't be making fun of Marjorie, but I am making
Well, you're doing
fun
it
of
through,
Marjorie.
but you're doing it through Nick's eyes.
Yes,
in a
exactly.
sense,
That's
and
how
what
he
he's
hears
saying.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
This,
Right.
give me Bill any day.
And it's not so, sure, and not so much for dealing with her feelings, but the fact that it brings you perilously, or do you think that it brings you perilously close to your own? That's the problem with listening to Marjorie. I might have to actually cope with my own feelings, and I certainly don't want to go there.
Yes. Yeah. Although in that story, it's Bill is already there. It's clear that he knows that this breakup is supposed to happen. So he's, was it successful? I mean, essentially, Bill,
Right.
How'd it go?
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
smooth? She go away? And one of the things that Nick says several times in that story is, I don't know. I don't know why I need to do this.
Right.
I don't, that's the phrase that he
Right.
repeats. And then at the end of that story, we have this totally strange non sequitur. Bill selected a sandwich from the lunch basket and walked over to have a look at the rods. Who cares?
Why do you think? What's going on there?
Bill can make selections.
He's selecting.
Bill can make choices. Nick is having a really hard time making choices. And I think that's, I think that's, I'm trying to respond to something you said earlier in your question about this. I mean, what, do I want to be with the girl? Do I not want to be with her? Krebs says, you don't really need to be with a girl if you don't think about them. But if you start to think about them,
right.
then maybe you need to be with one. And in the 3-day blow where Nick and Bill get smashed,
Right.
they're trying not to talk about Marjorie. They talk about books, and they talk about poetry, and they talk about sports, and they keep talking about Marjorie, the Marge business. And Bill clearly thinks that it should be over. And Nick says at one point, I oughtn't to talk about it. You aren't. Well, he is. You aren't talking about it. Those logs aren't stolen.
Right. Right.
Okay. You aren't. I talked about it, Bill said, and now I'm through. We won't ever speak about it again. You don't want to think about it. This goes the way Krebs does.
Krebs.
If you think about it, you might get back into it again. Okay, start thinking about it. And then Nick says, Nick had not thought about that. It had seemed so absolute. That was a thought. That made him feel better. Okay? So he hasn't really made a choice. Maybe, at the end of this, the wind blew it all out of his head. Still, which is to say the wind didn't blow it all out of his head, he could always go into town Saturday night, i.e. run into Marjorie. It was a good thing to have that in reserve. Okay, so it's that in reserve in case I figure out what my feelings are, but I'm not going to figure out what my feelings are.
No, when you're going to.
But it's good to have it in reserve.
Right.
That maybe I could go back to Marjorie. Okay, I feel better.
Yeah, well, not go back to her, run into her, which is to
Run
say
into
another
her.
accident could happen and I could be blown into her, but I'm not going to choose. I mean, getting back to your notion of
Yes.
selection, which I hadn't
Yeah.
really found
Well,
in this, but now
it's
that you
just-
say it, what he wants is for all these accidents to then create the absolute, but please, for God's sake, don't make me.
Yeah. I mean, I actually worried about the last sentence in that for a while until, why do we care whether Bill selected a sandwich? But I think that's, it really is making, and that, he knows, I want roast beef, I don't want tuna.
Yeah.
And Nick doesn't know whether he wants roast beef or tuna.
No, and interestingly enough, now that you say that, the fact that it ends there suggests that Nick cannot pick up on this fourth option for masculinity. You gave us the 3 in Indian camp, none of which are too good. The fourth is to come to terms with your feelings and yourself, at least about the sandwich, for goodness sake, and choose, And that, but the story ends there, so we never see whether Nick tracks any of this. I mean, it would be a pretty, obviously not a
3-day blow
profound
ends,
moment.
right.
But he doesn't seem to grasp the point that this could be a fourth option, this business of choice, this business of, sort of making a decision. So he's still lost in this world of three very poor options: suicide, disassociation. You want to, what?
I'm watching him.
We're going to do, we could move on to the third question, but we have another question here. How did you feel when Nick did get married and his wife was pregnant? Did that increase or decrease his masculinity?
Increase or decrease his masculinity?
I have these catalog branding. What's the name of the story where that was?
It's toward the end. I wonder what in that question masculinity means. I suppose it lets us know that he is capable of heterosexual sex.
Right.
But I think in these stories, masculinity is not about that. It's not sexual. It's a state of mind, and I think it's a for Hemingway's characters, it's a pretty fragile state of mind. And I don't see Nick being able to have a better home life than his father has in The Doctor and the Doctor's Wife. I think there will be a place. Yes, he has a wife. There's a family, and these are the people that you need to go away from. So you need to go fishing, you need to go hunting, you need to go somewhere. You need to go somewhere where they don't go.
Particularly if they threaten to bring you inside yourself,
Right.
to come to terms with those feelings.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at maybe one of the potential causes for this, and that would be question 3. He liked to open cans, a suggestion of post-traumatic stress. One of many suggestions of post-traumatic stress in these stories, but this in The Big Two-Hearted River. How big a part do you think that plays, that the damage done to this soldier plays a part in his trouble with coming to terms with who he is as a human being and that masculinity?
Well, I think he was, in my reading, as I guess I'm suggesting, I think he was a very fragile person even before he became a soldier. Okay, just holding it all together.
Sure.
Okay, and so then you're trying to hold it all together, and then you're in that situation where he's wounded, but he's also a witness to awful stuff. And so that's why I said post-traumatic stress disorder just because I know that that's a term we use. I'm not sure that I would necessarily want to. I don't like sort of using the clinical term as an interpretation,
sure.
but I use that just by way of, again, bringing Nick into our world.
Right. Well, and for our lay understanding of what that is and what the symptoms are, it seems to me that, again, as a layperson who just reads enough about it, you'd have to say there's quite a bit of that.
Okay, you tell me what you think about he liked to open cans.
Well, I see that didn't grab me the way it did you, so you have to tell me. That was
It's such a non-starter as a sentence, but it's.
Now that you say it, it seems like a silly thing to put in your short story, but words being a commodity and
Yeah, but.
pages being expensive, what's the point?
Right.
What's the point of telling us that? Joanne, we are going to get back to your point here in a moment, but I want to. Joanne sort of amplified her point on pregnancy. I wanted to let her know we're going to get there, but we'll finish this thought.
Okay.
On
There it is. I think, let's just go back just a little bit before that. He goes into the woods. He picks out the right spot. It's got to be the right spot. to set up his tent. Tent gets set up, and he sets it up by himself. You know how hard it is to set up a tent? And
especially those big, I mean, he's dealing with some big old canvas nasty tent. Nylon,
okay, and it
that
goes,
kind of
he
tent.
gets it up without a hitch, so everything's still, it's okay. No, tent gets put up and it doesn't collapse on him, the poles don't go the other way, it's gotta be just right. And Nick was happy as he crawled inside the tent. He had not been unhappy all day. This was different though. Now things were done, period. There had been this to do, period. Now it was done, okay? He had made his camp. He was settled. Nothing could touch him. Now he was hungry. And I think, what I see those sentences doing is showing us how small he needs to make his world, and get, okay, so now he's happy. Yeah, he's real happy, isn't he?
Well, he's not unhappy.
He's not unhappy.
He's not unhappy.
He's not unhappy. He's not having a nervous breakdown. What I learned about he'd like to open cans is that it's just kind of so doable and uncomplicated. Okay, I know every now and then, even if I'm sort of having some stress, I like to cook because you do this and
Right.
then you get that. Okay.
Yeah, predictable result. without a
Predictable
lot of
result.
effort, yeah.
Okay. Like
And
to
it's
open
neat.
cans, and it's very neat.
Yeah.
And then you just eat out of the can.
Yeah.
The onion sandwich. Did this make you want to eat an onion sandwich?
Well, it made me want to, it wasn't until I got to the buckwheat pancakes, actually.
Okay.
I started to salivate, but because actually the spaghetti and the stew with ketchup, not so good.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting here is that right after this, he starts to remember his friend Hopkins. And but doing that, this is toward the end of part one. In remembering Hopkins, he says his mind was starting to work. He knew he could choke it because it was tired enough. Okay?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that says to me is that even remembering is like fishing the swamp. I said to you earlier that having a relationship with a woman is fishing the swamp, or maybe you said
which you wouldn't do.
also
Which you
being
wouldn't do, yeah.
being in some sense a complete person is fishing, requires some fishing the swamp.
Which he didn't do. I mean, we point
No,
out that
yeah,
he's not going to do that.
Fishing the swamp, he
Right.
says, would be a tragedy.
Right, a tragedy. Yeah.
What a weird, wonderful word to use in that
Only
sense.
because you might not fully succeed. You could hook
Yeah.
the fish, but maybe not get him out.
Yeah.
And that's
But in this
tragic.
whole Hopkins thing, I think we can see, oops, I'm remembering, I'm fishing the swamp. Not good.
Get me outta here.
Get out of here. Yeah.
I want to get back
Okay,
to
Mark.
Joanne's point,
Yeah, sure.
where she asked about whether he was more masculine or this represented a deeper masculinity. And she's saying that, in her opinion, he didn't really seem to feel like marriage or his wife's pregnancy meant that much to him.
Do I agree? Yes. Can I get away with that simple?
Well-
I mean, much to him I think that the question suggests a certain kind of expectation that we would expect these things to mean
Right.
something to him. But I think at this point, the marriage, the pregnancy, the prospect of family can mean only so much as Nick has the capacity for, and
Right.
his capacity in that sense is really limited. Because, what if this guy who likes to open cans, what if his baby got sick?
And he had
No.
to feel bad about it,
Or
afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think
As long as I keep my distance, then maybe I can protect myself, but I need to keep my distance. But I, of course, fall into, I get married because that's what my friends are all doing it too.
No, and I think that's the impetus behind the question, is that even these tropes that these structures that we've designed for ourselves to, if not define, at least mark masculinity. I got married, man.
Yes.
I had a baby, sired a child, ooh, I'm a man. And yet, for all the reasons you just said, and I think that Joanne detected, that's not really developing his masculinity because of his disassociation with himself.
Right.
His fear of himself, his fear of his own swamp. Can't do it. And
Yeah.
none of the structures are going to mean anything if you can't do that thing.
Yeah.
Here's what Lee is suggesting, that as a trout fisher, this seems in line with classic fishing literature as Robert Traver and Sparse Gray hackle of that time. Oh, I see, yeah. Seems to be pre-TV entertainment. It is very descriptive. All of the descriptions of animals and being in the gravel, or the horses in the case of the jockey. There was no more vivid imagery ever written for me than those horses getting up, jerking their heads. So he's a pretty good nature writer. I guess.
Yeah, but I think that again, those details are helping us to be with Nick and pay attention to the things that he's paying attention to.
Yeah.
And just to see what he is seeing, and see those trout, and all of that. I mean, how. I mean, I don't think he can't just say Nick went fishing.
Yeah.
It's got to be this soothing, beautiful. It's soothing as long as he catches them,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as he also, when he puts the grasshoppers on the hook, he doesn't hook himself. I mean, there's all this.
Right.
He's just this delicate creature, finally, Nick is. He can't
I thought of
even,
that. Yeah, he's afraid.
he's got to be really, really take care of himself. If he gets that hook, I've done some trout fishing in my time.
No.
And if, there's all kinds of stuff that can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he avoids, I poke out the eye of my Ernest by having him fish, line gets caught, you pull it like this, and then whack.
Oh.
Okay, if you loosen it
Yeah.
too forcefully,
Yeah.
it can come right back at you. And so that was what happens to that guy.
Joanne wants to know why Hemingway spent so much time describing the trout in the stream.
Yeah, I think
that's
didn't I
part
just
of it.
describe
I think we
that?
just did that.
I tried to answer
yeah.
that question, because this is,
Right.
this is actually part of the beauty, and Nick has a wonderful sort of respect also. I mean, he has an aesthetic appreciation and a respect for the fish in the stream. And I think it's just a way of, letting us know kind of what an expert appreciator he is.
What's the significance of the trout being male? I didn't really track that too well. I mean, we were told that the trout were male, and that's obviously important. And he caught them and he killed them, and I didn't quite get why that mattered.
Well, when you catch a female, the chances are, and in a way, I think I'm not going to make up a statistic because I don't know, but I know that in the female trout that I have caught, when you gut them, there are eggs in there, and it's messy.
Yeah.
And it's, there's...
And she'll tell you how she feels about
We
it.
have an expert over here.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
And that's what you hate.
But you don't want to have all that,
Right.
it's much better, and you can tell you should be able to tell by the color of the
Right.
of the scales,
clear
whether
he
it's
knew.
male or female, right? And he just doesn't want to cut into that
Yeah,
egg sac,
that's interesting.
and not because I think it's because it's messy, not because he's tender-hearted about female fish. But I don't think it's anything. I don't think there's. Hemingway almost never in these stories deals in symbols. Okay, the swamp is some exception, I think. The swamp is clearly a kind of a symbol. But other than that, he doesn't, the trout don't stand for something. They're just trout.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
Should we move on? And we're pursuing this theme.
Yeah, poor
let's-
Sam Cardinelli.
Well, let's get this question, because I want to get as many questions in as we can, and we do continue to invite yours. Joanne now wants to know, I hope that one vignette that seemingly has no connection to the following story will be discussed for those of us who didn't get it. Well, which one is that?
Is that Sam Cardinelli?
That one vignette that, I mean, all of them seemed either tangentially related or not. And is that one, this one? Oh, here it is. So often, this would be chapter 12 and how it ties into cross-country snow. Well, we can talk about that and whether or not they were tied particularly to the next story or if they created their own narrative. For me, it was a kind of separate narrative that threaded the stories, but not directly related to. Now,
Yeah, in
I may not have
fact,
been
I
reading
am
it well
told
enough.
by my colleague Vic Strandberg that the very, very first version of In Our Time was just the vignettes,
Oh,
just the intro chapters.
wow.
And, you know, I think just, you know, it's very inexpensively handed around at the time.
Oh.
But at least that's what.
So this is, so if it happened right down close in front of you, you could see Vialta snarl at the bull, curse him, and the bull charged. He swung back firmly like an oak. When the wind hits it, his legs tight together. Is it Muleta? Trailing the sword, following. Cursed, the bull flopped the Muleta at him. When he started to kill, it was all in the same rush. Well, this does, I don't know. I mean, to a certain extent, it doesn't relate directly to cross-country snow because it's a bullfighting vignette.
Well, I think in this case, I mean, I think that for the reason this one doesn't fit is that Vialta is successful.
Yeah, I mean, that's right.
Okay, he went just barely,
Right.
but he makes it. But I think that the idea, the way that it is connected, is that what is it that he's actually doing? No, I mean, what is? Yes, he's okay. So he kills the bull instead of the bull killing him. Great. So there's a kind of, I mean, I think what, you know, as a bullfighter, of course, this is his job.
Right.
Okay. This is, I think, a sort of version of pulling off the cesarean with the fish gut. You know.
Yeah.
Hey, you know, got through that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was able to beat that bull, even though he was on top of me practically.
Yeah, you're right about the fact that I had to read the last line a couple of times because his legs caving, I thought, well, that has to be Vialta because all of his characters, one way or another, are marred by the fight, and you're right, he comes out unscathed.
Yeah.
Well, let's pursue a couple more of Joanne's questions here so that we can
Joanna's really into them.
make sure that we
Okay.
get to these. I find My Old Man the most intriguing story. However, did Hemingway allow himself to be more emotive and personal in the story than others? Was it atypical of his style? The son's love and emotion for his father so strong. Yeah, he said, I love that guy, which that jumped out at me too in this series of stories. The ending of the son's realization of his father's cheating, which he learned on his father's death, had a strong impact on the reader. So most of this has to do with the way there seems to be a man who's capable of some kind of emotion. Is that odd?
And
Or emotional
there's
expression.
something, okay, but, you know, what's cool about this question and about the difference is that this is the story that's in the first person.
Oh, My Old Man. That's right. So do you think this
And,
is more,
you know-
was this meant to be more, but what's going on here? Why
Well,
is
I
it
mean,
in
I
here?
think, why is it in here?
Yeah, I mean, why?
Well, there are
what's-
stories in here that are not Nick Adams stories.
Right, right.
And I think, I mean, in that sense, I mean, that's why I wanted to sort of pretty much focus on the Nick Adams stories and the related vignettes. But you know, this is a first collection of stories, and so he's got these other stories that are sort of in the vicinity of the topic.
Right.
If insofar as Hemingway understands his topic to be manhood, insofar as he does. And so I think the others, the stories, Mr. and Mrs. Elliot, My Old Man, they touch on these problems. But My Old Man, that the fact that it's in the first person gives it a whole other feel.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons you avoid the first person is to avoid you.
Yeah.
If you can set it up, my Joan, in one of the stories that she tells about herself, never uses the first person. She talks about Joan.
You're talking about your book now. I had to
Yeah,
read it.
I'm just referring to that. But that's something that I learned from Hemingway. Why you don't use first person, because it's fishing the swamp. Okay? If you're
you into
using
all
first
that
person,
mess.
as this boy is, he's remembering, he's trying to figure out his father, he's trying to figure out himself. And I think that's why maybe Joanne likes him, because he just seems a richer character, but he's not as fearful and as fragile as Nick and the others.
Let's move on to our last question, which is Hemingway.
Be a son? Be a man?
Be a man. Right. There we go. Be a man, my son. Yeah, this is a man on the way to the gallows, right? Who cannot even bring himself to walk. He's now going to have to be carried to the gallows, and it's the priest who gives him that sound advice that on your way to the gallows, you need to be a man.
Right.
What do you make of
Is that what we say to Jesus?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's
no,
interesting that he has the priest say this. There are all other kinds of guys on the gallows. There's 7 people seven people around carrying Sam Cardinella. The priest says, "Be a man, my son." It's tough. Anyway, what we seem to then and now have a sense of what that means. Die well. Go to war. Know how to chest bump. I know how to fist bump, by the way.
You know?
That's pretty gentle.
That's great. That's great. See you November 4th.
But I think dying well is really important. And what? Don't break down. This is a version of the scream. Sam Cardinelli doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be hung. And he's letting them know. And letting them know means he's not being a man. Okay? So they have to hang him, they strap him in the chair and hang him in the chair. And I say, good for him. He was himself at the end there. He didn't do this be a man thing. We don't have the expression, be a woman.
Right.
It's just not in our lexicon. As far as I know, we don't have that. But be a man, we all seem to have a sense of what that means. And anyway, so I feel, Sam Cardinella breaks my heart, but I also think I'm glad he didn't push them away and stand up and suck it up.
How much of this, I know we don't have much time, but how much of this do you think represents dealing with manhood in the modern age? In other words, that this pathological sense of manhood has all of these crazy symbols that lead you away, further and further away from the swamp, further and further away from your own self, all of which prove your manhood in a pathological, indirect way. Is that a problem of modern times that Hemingway has come to, or is that just a problem for men always? I mean, is there something about this series that suggests modern times is creating a pathological sense of who we are as men?
I think men have more options these days, and I think we're in better shape. But in a way, as a woman reading this, I mean, what I get from this is that, I want to be able to figure out ways to provide the men in my life, or man, what's it men? yeah, let's just say, the minute of my life, a sort of freedom and space to be more. And not make them be more, but just say, it's going to be okay. You're going to have a Sam Cardinella moment, go ahead. Okay? And I'm not going to have that sort of, I'm not myself going to buy in to what I consider the sort of painful macho expectations. Okay? I'm not going to help you buy into that.
I hope it's getting better and better. What a pleasure to talk with you, Professor Malouf. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to remind all of you that we will be here next, our next session is Wednesday, November 19th, and Judith Ruderman, who is a PhD and Vice Provost for Academic and Administrative Services and Adjunct Professor of English, will discuss Howard's End by E.M. Forrester. And please send us your questions and your comments in advance. Thank you very much.
Bye.